What happens when arrogance and prejudice collide with power and truth at 35,000 feet? For Amelia Monroe, a brilliant young scientist on the verge of a career-making breakthrough, her dream trip in first class turned into a public nightmare. She was belittled, humiliated, and forcibly removed from her seat, all because a wealthy young man decided she didn't belong. But he made one critical mistake. He had no idea who she was, and more importantly, he had no idea who his own father was about to prove himself to be. Stay with us for a story of injustice, a shocking revelation, and the kind of hard, life-altering karma that you have to see to believe. Everything changed in just 15 minutes. The first-class cabin of the British Airways A380 flying from JFK to Heathrow was an oasis of curated tranquility. The lighting was soft, the scent of expensive leather and subtle perfume hung in the air, and the gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce engines was a lullaby for the privileged. For Dr. Amelia Monroe, it was surreal. At 28, she was more accustomed to the cramped confines of university libraries and late nights in the lab, fueled by cheap coffee and the dizzying thrill of discovery. This flight, however, was different. It was a celebration. She clutched the leather-bound portfolio on her lap, its contents worth more to her than the ticket for seat 3K. Inside was her presentation for the Symposium for Advanced Propulsion Physics in London, a revolutionary paper on manipulating space-time metrics, a theoretical model that brought the concept of a stable warp field, a concept often represented by the Alcubierre metric, out of the realm of science fiction and into the plausible future. It was the culmination of 4 years of relentless work, and Ether Innovations, the world's leading aerospace technology firm, had not only invited her to present, but had paid for this first-class ticket. Amelia, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue blazer and trousers, looked out the window at the bustling tarmac of JFK. She was a picture of understated confidence, her mind already rehearsing her opening lines. She was black, she was a woman, and she was about to fundamentally challenge the old guard of theoretical physics. She felt a quiet, simmering excitement. The tranquility was shattered by a loud, braying laugh. "I'm telling you, Tiffany, the man had the audacity to offer me a domestic," a voice boomed from the aisle. A young man, probably around Amelia's age, swaggered into the cabin. He was handsome in a generic billboard ad kind of way, dressed in designer sweats that likely cost more than a month's rent on Amelia's old apartment. His hair was perfectly coiffed, and he wore an expression of supreme, unearned confidence. Following him was a blonde woman, Tiffany, who clung to his arm, mirroring his air of entitlement. They were Caleb and Tiffany Davenport. Caleb stopped short when he saw Amelia in seat 3K. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed his face. He checked his ticket, then looked back at her. "Excuse me," he said, his tone not questioning but accusatory. "I think you're in our seat." Amelia offered a polite, closed-mouth smile. "I don't believe so. My ticket is for 3K. Tiffany leaned in and whispered loudly to Caleb, "Maybe she's confused about the cabin numbers, sweetie." Caleb smirked. "Right, ma'am," he said, drawing the word out as if speaking to a child. "This is the first-class cabin. Economy is that way." He gestured vaguely towards the back of the plane. The condescension was a physical thing, a thick, cloying smoke that filled the space between them. Amelia felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, but she tamped it down. She had faced this kind of casual prejudice her entire life. She would not let it ruin this moment. "I'm well aware of where I am, thank you," she replied, her voice even. "And this is my assigned seat." She held up her boarding pass, the bold seat 3K class first, clearly visible. Caleb's smirk faltered for a second before being replaced by a sneer. He wasn't used to being challenged. "Look, I'm not trying to cause a scene, but my girlfriend and I have seats 3J and 3K. The airline probably made a mistake. They've been double booking like crazy." Just then, a flight attendant named Brenda, a woman with a weary smile and years of service etched around her eyes, arrived. "Is there a problem here, sir?" "Yes, there is," Caleb said, immediately turning on the charm. the kind of charm that expected and usually received total compliance. "This woman is in my girlfriend's seat. I think there's been a mix-up." Brenda looked at Amelia, her professional smile tightening. "Ma'am, could I please see your boarding pass?" Amelia handed it to her. Brenda examined it, then looked at Caleb's. A frown creased her brow. "It seems we do have a duplicate booking for seat 3K. I am so sorry about this. Let me just check my manifest." She bustled off to the galley. Caleb leaned against the seat partition, crossing his arms. "See? A mistake, don't worry, they'll find you a spot somewhere in the back." Amelia ignored him, turning her gaze back to the window. The humiliation was a cold stone in her stomach. Every other passenger in the cabin was now watching, their gazes a mixture of pity, curiosity, and veiled agreement with Caleb. They saw a young black woman in a space they felt was reserved for people who looked like them, and they saw a confident, wealthy white man asserting his dominance. They had already chosen a side. Brenda returned, her expression even more stressed. "This is very unusual. Both of your tickets appear valid in the system, but Mr. Davenport here is one of our executive platinum members." She looked at Amelia apologetically. "Ma'am, we will of course compensate you for the downgrade. We have a middle seat available in Economy Plus." "A downgrade?" Amelia's voice was sharp now. "I'm not accepting a downgrade. I was booked in this seat. My ticket was paid for by the company sponsoring my conference." Caleb scoffed. "What company? The janitorial service?" The cruelty of the remark hung in the air. Tiffany giggled. Amelia felt her composure cracking. She stood up, meeting Caleb's gaze directly. "For your information, I am a guest of Ether Innovations. I am an astrophysicist presenting research that my colleagues believe will redefine interstellar travel. This seat, this flight, is not a luxury for me. It's a necessity for my career. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to sit back down in my seat." Her words, delivered with cold, clear precision, seemed to stun Caleb for a moment. But Brenda, the flight attendant, was now visibly panicked. The last thing she wanted was a confrontation that delayed the flight. Caleb was a high-status passenger. Amelia was an unknown. The path of least resistance was clear. "Ma'am, please," Brenda said, her voice pleading. "We can't have a disturbance. Mr. Davenport is a valued customer. I'm going to have to insist that you allow me to escort you to your new seat." "Insist?" Amelia was incredulous. "You're going to remove me from a seat I paid for based on his word against mine? Based on his status?" "It's not about that," Brenda said, though her averted eyes told a different story. "It's about resolving a logistical issue." "No," Caleb cut in, his voice hard. "It's about the fact that she's making everyone uncomfortable. She clearly doesn't belong here, and now she's getting hysterical." That was the final straw. "Hysterical," Amelia repeated, her voice dangerously low. "Brenda," Caleb said, pointing a thumb at Amelia. "Are you going to handle this, or do I need to speak to the captain? I want her moved, now." The ultimatum worked. Brenda's face went pale. She looked at Amelia, her eyes now stripped of any pretense of apology. "Ma'am, you need to come with me now, or I will have to call airport security to remove you from the flight." The threat was real. The humiliation was absolute. Defeated, Amelia slowly gathered her blazer and her precious portfolio. The eyes of the entire cabin were on her as she followed Brenda down the aisle, a walk of shame that felt a mile long. She passed Caleb, who gave her a triumphant, dismissive smirk as he slid into the aisle seat, and Tiffany, who was already settling into seat 3K, Amelia's seat, without a shred of remorse. As Amelia was squeezed into a cramped middle seat in row 45, between a snoring man and a woman with a crying baby, the last of her composure crumbled. A single hot tear of pure rage and helplessness traced a path down her cheek. The cabin door was about to close. The battle was lost. 15 minutes passed. For Amelia, they were an eternity of quiet fury. The drone of the engines was now a grating annoyance. The baby next to her wailed, a perfect soundtrack to the chaos in her mind. She tried to open her portfolio to review her notes, but there was no room. The man on her other side was spilling into her space, his arm resting possessively on the shared armrest. Every breath felt constricted. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an act of profound disrespect that threatened to derail the most important moment of her professional life. How could she possibly walk onto that stage in London with the confidence she needed after being so thoroughly debased? Up in first class, Caleb was holding court. A flight attendant had just served him and Tiffany glasses of champagne. "To getting what we want," Caleb said, clinking his glass against Tiffany's. "It's just about knowing how to talk to people, you know? Assertiveness." "You were so powerful, honey," Tiffany cooed, stroking his arm. "That woman was so aggressive. You handled it perfectly." Brenda, the flight attendant, walked by, forcing a smile. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Davenport?" "We're perfect, Brenda," he said, using her name with a casual ownership that made her skin crawl, though she didn't dare show it. "Thank you for being so efficient." "My pleasure, sir," she murmured, before retreating to the galley, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and a sour, curdling guilt. The final boarding call was announced over the intercom. The ground crew was preparing to pull back the jet bridge. It was at that precise moment that the calm of the first-class cabin was interrupted once more. The aircraft door, which had been about to close, was pushed open again. 2 gate agents appeared, followed by a man who commanded the attention of the entire cabin without saying a word. He was in his late 50s, tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet, immense wealth, not flashy trends. His silver-streaked hair was neat, and his face, etched with the lines of intense focus and sleepless nights, was set in a granite-like expression of deep displeasure. There was an aura of absolute authority about him. The flight attendants, including Brenda, immediately straightened up, their professional smiles snapping into place. This was Marcus Harrison. He scanned the first-class cabin, his sharp, intelligent eyes sweeping over the passengers. His gaze lingered for a moment on Caleb and Tiffany before continuing its search. Caleb, seeing him, felt a jolt. "Dad?" he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "What are you doing here? I thought you were taking the company jet tomorrow." Marcus Harrison's eyes snapped back to his son. The look he gave Caleb was not one of fatherly affection. It was glacial. "My plans changed," Marcus said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the cabin's hum. He ignored Caleb's outstretched hand and turned to Brenda, who had hurried over. "Ma'am," he said, his tone polite but steel-edged. "I'm looking for Dr. Amelia Monroe. My office confirmed she is on this flight, in seat 3K. Can you please tell me where she is?" Brenda's blood ran cold. The name, Dr. Amelia Monroe, and the seat number, 3K, collided in her brain with the force of a car crash. Her eyes darted nervously towards Caleb, then back to the imposing figure in front of her. "Dr. Monroe?" she stammered. "There was a seating issue, sir. A duplicate booking." Marcus Harrison's expression did not change, but a dangerous intensity grew in his eyes. "A seating issue? My company, Ether Innovations, booked that ticket. There is no issue. I will ask you again. Where is she?" Caleb, now realizing the catastrophic convergence of events, tried to intervene. "Dad, it was just a mix-up. This woman was making a scene, so they moved her. It's no big deal." Marcus turned his head slowly to face his son. "You were involved in this?" The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Tiffany, sensing the shift in power, shrank back in her seat, suddenly finding the patterns on the bulkhead fascinating. Brenda, trembling slightly, finally found her voice. "She was moved to seat 45B, sir, in economy." Marcus Harrison stared at her for a long, silent moment. In that silence, Brenda felt the entire structure of her career, her pension, her future, begin to groan and splinter. Without another word to her or to his son, Marcus Harrison turned and strode purposefully down the aisle, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the plush carpet, moving from the rarefied air of first class into the crowded confines of economy. The other first-class passengers watched, utterly captivated. This was drama far more compelling than any in-flight movie. Marcus found Amelia wedged in her middle seat, staring blankly ahead, the portfolio held tight to her chest like a shield. He stopped in the narrow aisle, and the passengers around her fell silent, sensing the importance of the moment. "Dr. Monroe?" he asked, his voice now gentle, laced with a deep, resonant apology. "Amelia?" Amelia looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. She saw the powerful man from the front of the plane standing before her. She had no idea who he was. "I am Marcus Harrison," he said, extending a hand. "I'm the CEO of Ether Innovations. I came here to personally apologize for what I have just learned has happened to you. This is an inexcusable failure on the part of the airline, and it seems on the part of my own family. It will be rectified. Immediately." Amelia stared at him, then at his outstretched hand, too stunned to move. The name Ether Innovations finally registered. This was the man whose company was funding her future. This was the man who held the keys to the kingdom she was trying to enter. And then, the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He had called Caleb his son. The arrogant, prejudiced young man who had publicly humiliated her was the son of the CEO who was her patron. Marcus Harrison seemed to read the complex storm of emotions on her face. "Please," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Allow me to escort you back to your seat, the one my company paid for, the one you have more than earned." Slowly, as if in a dream, Amelia took his hand. It was firm and warm. As he helped her to her feet, a path cleared in the economy cabin. The snoring man was awake now, staring. The woman with the baby had hushed the child, her eyes wide. They were all witnessing the dramatic reversal of fortune. As Marcus Harrison led Amelia back towards the front of the plane, a wave of stunned silence followed them, a prelude to the storm that was about to break in first class. The walk back to first class was the antithesis of Amelia's first journey down the aisle. Where before she had felt the sting of 100 judgmental eyes, she now felt a current of vindication. Marcus Harrison walked beside her, a silent, formidable guardian, his presence a clear and damning indictment of all that had just occurred. As they stepped back into the serene lighting of the first-class cabin, a hush fell. Every passenger who had passively watched her humiliation was now bolt upright, their champagne glasses forgotten. This was the second act, and the protagonist had returned with a king. Caleb was on his feet, his face a pale mask of horror. Tiffany had pressed herself against the window, trying to become invisible. Brenda, the flight attendant, stood frozen near the galley, wringing her hands. Marcus Harrison did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet authority was more terrifying than any shout. He stopped at row 3 and looked at Tiffany, who was occupying Amelia's seat. "Get up," he said. It wasn't a request. Tiffany scrambled out of the seat so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. She stood awkwardly in the aisle, looking at Caleb for guidance, but Caleb was staring at his father, paralyzed. Marcus turned to Amelia. "Dr. Monroe, your seat." He gestured to the plush leather window seat as if presenting a throne. Amelia, still processing the sheer velocity of the turn of events, sank into it. It felt different now. It felt earned. It felt like justice. Then Marcus Harrison turned his full, undivided attention to his son. "Caleb," he began, his voice dangerously soft. "I have spent 30 years building Ether Innovations. I built it on principles of merit, of integrity, and of looking to the future, not the past. I built it by finding the brightest minds on the planet, regardless of their gender, their race, or their background. People like Dr. Monroe." He gestured towards Amelia. "This woman, whose name you don't even know, is a guest of my company. Her work has the potential to generate billions of dollars in new technology and fundamentally alter our understanding of physics. She is a giant in her field. And you, who have never built anything, who have never earned anything that wasn't handed to you on a silver platter, you presume to judge her. You used your privilege, a privilege you have only because of my work, to humiliate her." Caleb finally found his voice, a pathetic, reedy version of its earlier boom. "Dad, I didn't know who she was. I thought she was... You thought what? Marcus's voice was like ice. That her skin color precluded her from being brilliant? That her gender meant she couldn't be a physicist? You didn't see a scientist. You saw a black woman and you decided she was out of place. You didn't just insult her, Caleb. You insulted my company. You insulted our guests. You insulted me. You showed the world that the son of Marcus Harrison is a petty, prejudiced fool. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Caleb's entire world in front of a captive audience. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening terror. I'm sorry, he stammered, looking not at Amelia, but at his father. You will apologize to Dr. Monroe, Marcus commanded. Caleb turned his head, his eyes skittering around Amelia's face, unable to meet her gaze. I'm sorry, he mumbled towards her shoulder. Look at her when you say it, Marcus snapped. Caleb flinched. He forced himself to look at Amelia, who sat there, her expression unreadable, a quiet queen observing the collapse of a petty tyrant's kingdom. I am sorry, Dr. Monroe, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Amelia simply nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement, not of forgiveness. Forgiveness was a currency Caleb hadn't earned, but Marcus Harrison was not finished. He turned his chilling gaze to Brenda. You, he said. Brenda visibly flinched. You are an employee of this airline. Your duty is to the safety and fair treatment of all passengers. You had 2 boarding passes for the same seat. One belonged to a passenger. The other belonged to a high-status frequent flyer. And you chose to believe the man who bullied you. You chose the path of least resistance, and in doing so, you became complicit in this disgusting display. Sir, I was just trying to prevent a delay. Brenda's voice broke. Do you know Robert Cole, the CEO of British Airways? Marcus asked calmly. Brenda shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. Finally, Marcus Harrison looked at his son again. The paternal disappointment had been replaced by something harder, something colder. It was the look of a CEO making a difficult but necessary business decision. You will not be sitting here, Marcus said. He turned to a different flight attendant who was watching from a distance. Excuse me, is seat 45B still available? The flight attendant, wide-eyed, nodded. Yes, sir. Excellent, Marcus said, turning back to Caleb. That will be your seat for the remainder of the flight, the middle seat. I believe Dr. Monroe can attest to its comfort. Tiffany can join you in economy, or she can find another flight. I don't care. Now go. You are an embarrassment. The order was absolute. Stripped of his power, his status, and his dignity, Caleb Davenport, the man who had swaggered into first class an hour earlier, turned and performed his own walk of shame down the aisle, his designer sweats suddenly looking cheap and pathetic. Tiffany, after a moment of stunned hesitation, grabbed her purse and scurried after him, not wanting to be left alone with the silent, wrathful CEO. Marcus Harrison took a deep breath and finally allowed a hint of warmth to enter his eyes as he looked at Amelia. He took the aisle seat, 3J, that Caleb had occupied. Now, Dr. Monroe, he said, his voice returning to a normal conversational tone as if the hurricane had passed. Please, tell me about your paper. I've read the abstract. It's magnificent. The plane finally began to push back from the gate, its engines spooling up for the long journey across the Atlantic. For some, it would be the longest, most agonizing flight of their lives. For Amelia, against all odds, it was beginning to feel like a coronation. The 7-hour flight to London became a bizarre, suspended reality. In the front of the plane, a new world was being built. In the back, an old one was being systematically demolished. For Amelia and Marcus Harrison, the journey was an unexpected and profound meeting of minds. After the initial searing tension had dissipated, Marcus proved to be not just a powerful CEO, but a man with a genuine and deep passion for the science his company was built upon. He had an engineering background, and he listened to Amelia not with the polite detachment of a benefactor, but with the keen, critical ear of a fellow enthusiast. So the negative energy density problem, he said, leaning in. Your model proposes using quantum fluctuation engineering to create localized Casimir-like effects, but on a macro scale. How do you plan to stabilize it? Amelia, now completely in her element, forgot the humiliation. She forgot Caleb. She opened her portfolio on the spacious tray table and spread out her papers. That's the core of it, she explained, her voice alive with passion. Instead of a single, massive source of negative energy, which is unstable, I'm proposing a fractal array of micro-apertures, each generating a minuscule, controllable warp bubble. They work in concert, creating a harmonic resonance that stabilizes the overall field. Think of it less like a battering ram and more like a million tiny hands, gently parting the fabric of space-time. Marcus stared at her equations, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. Brilliant, he murmured. Absolutely brilliant. It's elegant. It sidesteps the exotic matter problem almost entirely. They talked for hours. They discussed the future of ether innovations, the ethical implications of her research, and the state of the STEM field. Amelia spoke of the challenges she'd faced as a woman of color in a predominantly white male discipline. Marcus listened, his expression somber, nodding in understanding. The world is full of Calebs, Dr. Monroe, he said grimly. People who inherit position but not perspective. The greatest challenge for leaders is to build systems that elevate people like you and sideline people like him. It seems I have failed at that, spectacularly within my own family. Meanwhile, 40 rows back, Caleb was living a personal hell. Squeezed into the narrow confines of seat 45B, his knees jammed against the seat in front of him, he was a caged lion. The man on his left was still snoring, occasionally lolling his head onto Caleb's shoulder. On his right sat Tiffany, but this was not the adoring Tiffany from before. The power dynamic had shifted, and she was shifting with it. "I cannot believe you," she hissed under her breath, keeping her voice low. "You just had to pick a fight with her. You just had to be a big man." "How was I supposed to know who she was?" Caleb whispered back, his voice ragged with fury and shame. "How was I supposed to know he would be on this flight?" "It doesn't matter," Tiffany shot back. "You were rude, you were a snob, and now look at us. Your father hates you. Everyone in first class saw you get kicked out like a piece of garbage. My friends are going to hear about this. Our friends." The hour was telling. She was already distancing herself, calculating the social fallout. Her entire relationship with Caleb had been transactional, based on his access to wealth and status. With that foundation now crumbling, her loyalty was evaporating in real time. "He'll get over it," Caleb said, trying to convince himself more than her. "He's my father." "He looked at you like you were a bad investment, Caleb," Tiffany said coldly. "And I don't stick with bad investments." For the rest of the flight, she put on her noise-canceling headphones, turned toward the aisle, and completely ignored him, leaving him to stew in the thick recirculated air of his own failure. Brenda, the flight attendant, performed her duties like an automaton. Her face was a puffy, tear-streaked mess that she tried to hide with a veneer of professionalism. Every time she had to walk through the first-class cabin, she avoided Marcus Harrison's gaze as if it were radioactive. She knew her fate was sealed. The walk from the galley to the cockpit felt like traversing a minefield. The other flight attendants treated her with a mixture of pity and distance, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius of her career's implosion. As the plane began its descent into Heathrow, Marcus turned to Amelia. "Dr. Monroe," he said, his tone shifting back to that of a CEO. "Ether Innovations has a car waiting for me. I would be honored if you would share it to the hotel. It's the least I can do." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," Amelia said. "I'd appreciate that. And please," he added, a hint of a smile returning, "call me Marcus." When the plane finally docked at the gate, the fasten seatbelt sign switched off. In first class, the passengers rose, gathering their belongings. They gave Marcus and Amelia a wide berth, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. In economy, Caleb leaped from his seat the moment the chime sounded, desperate to escape his prison. He and Tiffany pushed their way up the aisle, swimming against the tide of other passengers. They arrived at the front just in time to see Amelia and Marcus being personally greeted at the aircraft door by a uniformed British Airways station manager, whose face was a mask of grave apology. "Mr. Harrison, Dr. Monroe, on behalf of British Airways, I am so terribly sorry for the experience on this flight. We have arranged for expedited passage through customs and have your vehicle waiting." Caleb watched, invisible, as his father and the woman he had scorned were whisked away like royalty. Tiffany saw it too. Without a word, she adjusted the strap of her designer bag, gave Caleb one last look of pure disdain, and strode off in a different direction, disappearing into the crowd. Left alone in the jet bridge, stripped of his girlfriend, his father's respect, and his own self-worth, Caleb Davenport was finally truly on his own. The consequences had only just begun. The karma that befell Caleb, Tiffany, and Brenda wasn't a single explosive event. It was a slow, systemic unraveling, a meticulous dismantling of the lives they had built on foundations of privilege, opportunism, and prejudice. Marcus Harrison was not a man who made idle threats. He was a man who executed strategy. Caleb's first inkling that this was more than just a temporary parental freeze-out came when his corporate American Express was declined at the Heathrow coffee shop. Panicked, he tried his personal card, linked to his trust fund. Declined. He called his father's office, but his father's longtime executive assistant, a woman who had known him since he was a boy, was professionally icy. "I'm sorry, Caleb, but Mr. Harrison has left explicit instructions that all of your company accounts and access have been suspended pending a review." The review was a formality. 2 days later, while Amelia was receiving a standing ovation for her presentation at the symposium, with Marcus Harrison sitting proudly in the front row, an official press release went out from Ether Innovations. It didn't name Caleb, but it didn't have to. It announced the immediate termination of a senior marketing executive for conduct grossly misaligned with the company's core values of integrity, respect, and diversity. The statement went on to reaffirm Ether's commitment to fostering an environment where brilliance can thrive, regardless of background, and announced a new multi-million-dollar scholarship fund in partnership with historically black colleges and universities aimed at students in STEM fields. The business world read between the lines. The story of the incident on the plane, whispered by first-class passengers and airline staff, spread like wildfire through corporate and social circles. Caleb wasn't just fired. He was a cautionary tale. He was toxic. Cut off from the family fortune, he was forced to fly back to New York, in economy. He had to sell his sports car to cover the first few months' rent on a small apartment in a walk-up building. The friends who once flocked to his table at exclusive clubs suddenly didn't return his calls. He was no longer a Davenport of Ether Innovations. He was just Caleb, a guy with a useless marketing degree and a reputation for being a racist bully. His name was an anchor, not a key. Marcus Harrison made good on his promise. His call to Robert Cole, the CEO of British Airways, was not emotional or angry. It was factual and damning. He laid out the events calmly, framing it as a systemic failure of corporate culture. An internal investigation was launched immediately. It was swift and brutal. Brenda's record was scrutinized, and while she had no major prior incidents, investigators interviewed the other crew members from Flight 178. They all confirmed that she had capitulated to an aggressive passenger rather than defending a valid ticket holder. The station manager's report from Heathrow sealed her fate. Brenda was suspended without pay, and a month later, her employment was terminated. The reason given was a failure to follow established protocols for conflict resolution and passenger verification. But the real reason was that she had become a liability. In an age of viral videos and social media justice, British Airways could not afford to be seen as the airline that kowtowed to prejudice. They issued a formal public apology to Dr. Amelia Monroe, which was picked up by several news outlets, and announced a complete overhaul of their customer service and implicit bias training. Brenda's name was unofficially blacklisted in the tightly knit aviation industry. Her years of service counted for nothing. Tiffany's currency was proximity to power. When she abandoned Caleb at Heathrow, she tried to salvage her social standing. She immediately began spinning the story to her friends, painting herself as a victim, horrified by Caleb's shocking and unexpected behavior. It didn't work. She had been there. She had giggled at his cruel jokes. She had eagerly taken the seat. The first-class passengers who knew her social circle told a different story, one of a complicit sycophant. She was seen as someone who had hitched her wagon to the wrong horse and lacked the character to see it. The invitations to galas, yacht parties, and exclusive Hamptons weekends dried up. She had been an accessory to Caleb's status, and without him she was nothing. She faded from the A-list to the B-list, and finally into social obscurity, a ghost of parties past. In stark contrast to their collective fall, Amelia's star ascended with breathtaking speed. Her presentation was the talk of the symposium. Competing firms and universities tried to poach her, but her loyalty was now firmly with the man and the company that had stood by her. She formally accepted the position of Senior Research Fellow at Ether Innovations. Marcus Harrison became not just her boss, but her mentor and champion. He gave her a state-of-the-art lab, a hand-picked team, and a nearly unlimited budget. He saw her not as a symbol, but as the future. The story of what happened on the flight, though she never spoke of it publicly herself, became part of her legend. She wasn't defined by the humiliation, but by the grace and strength with which she had endured it, and the ultimate triumph of her merit. She became an unwilling but powerful role model for countless young women and people of color in STEM, a living testament to the idea that excellence is the ultimate rebuttal to prejudice. She was no longer just a brilliant scientist. She was a force of nature. The universe she studied was vast, but the one she was reshaping here on Earth was, for many, far more important. 6 months had passed. Time does not heal all wounds, but it does transform them. Scars fade from angry red to pale silver, and the sharp edges of memory are worn smooth by the relentless tide of days and nights. The orbits of Amelia, Caleb, and Marcus had not just shifted. They had been fundamentally redefined by the gravity of that single transatlantic flight. The Ether Innovations Advanced Propulsion Laboratory, nestled in a quiet valley in the English countryside, was more than a workplace. It was a sanctuary. Its centerpiece, a magnificent observatory dome, sat on the highest hill like a silent, waiting oracle. Tonight, the dome was open to the cosmos, and the colossal eye of the Hyperion telescope was aimed at the Cygnus constellation, drinking in light that had traveled for centuries to reach it. Inside, Dr. Amelia Monroe stood not with the nervous energy of a newcomer, but with the quiet, commanding presence of a leader. Her lab coat was draped over a chair. She was at home here. The data streaming onto her tablet represented the culmination of the last 6 months of relentless, joyous work. The prototype array, her fractal design for stabilizing a warp field, was generating consistent microscopic energy signatures. They were flickers in the cosmic dark, infinitesimally small, but they were real. They were proof of concept. They were the first whispers of a new age. She no longer thought about the flight every day, but the memory was not gone. It had become a part of her, a foundational layer in her identity. It was no longer a source of searing humiliation, but a whetstone against which her resolve had been sharpened. Sometimes, during a difficult calculation or a frustrating setback in the lab, the image of Caleb's sneering face would flash in her mind, but it no longer sparked anger. Instead, it fueled a cold, clean fire of determination. It was a reminder of what she represented, not just for herself, but for every young girl who would be told she didn't belong in a lab, in a boardroom, or in seat 3K. This afternoon she had been mentoring a new intern, a brilliant young woman named Priya from South London. Priya had been nervous, intimidated by the lab's prestige. Amelia had taken her aside and said, "Never let anyone else's small-mindedness define the size of your ambition. Their ceiling is not your sky." In that moment, Amelia understood that the incident had given her more than just a story. It had given her a voice and the wisdom to use it. The victim was gone, and in her place stood a mentor. A soft footfall on the observation deck's metal grating announced his arrival. Marcus Harrison held 2 steaming mugs, the aroma of strong coffee cutting through the cool night air. He moved with a familiar, weary grace. The 6 months had aged him more than the previous 6 years. The lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by decisions that carried immense personal weight. "Any new universes tonight, Doctor?" he asked. The question had become a running joke between them, a shorthand for progress. Amelia's smile was genuine, lighting up her face. "Not whole universes, but we've mapped the coastline. We're getting consistent energy readings from the prototype array. It's stable, Marcus. For fractions of a second, it's perfectly stable. It's working." "I never doubted it would," he said, his voice a low rumble of pride. He leaned on the railing beside her, looking up at the star-dusted sky. Their relationship had evolved beyond that of CEO and employee. He was her champion, and she, in a way, was his validation. She was the living embodiment of the principles he had espoused his entire life, the principles his own son had so spectacularly failed to grasp. She was his success, but she was also a constant, silent reminder of his most profound failure. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. It was a sound Amelia had come to associate with a subtle shift in his demeanor. He pulled it out. The screen cast a pale blue light on his face, illuminating his conflicted expression. It was an email from Caleb. Far away in the fluorescent-lit, concrete-floored purgatory of a big-box electronics store stockroom in Queens, New York, Caleb Davenport leaned against a stack of boxes containing 65-inch televisions. His back ached. A cut on his knuckle from a rogue box cutter stung with sweat. The designer sweats were long gone, sold for a fraction of their price. He now wore a standard-issue blue polo shirt with the store's logo and cheap, durable work pants. This was his life now. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week of lifting, sorting, and scanning. His co-workers were people he never would have noticed before. A middle-aged immigrant from El Salvador, saving to bring his family to the U.S., a young art student working to pay for supplies, a single mother juggling 2 jobs. At first, Caleb had resented them, resented his proximity to their ordinary struggles. He had been drowning in self-pity. But the relentless, humbling routine had worked on him like sandpaper, stripping away the glossy veneer of his entitlement. He started to listen. He heard their stories during their 15-minute breaks. He saw their exhaustion, their quiet dignity, their small joys. He started to see them not as background characters in his life, but as protagonists in their own. For the first time, he was invisible, and it allowed him to truly see. The change was gradual. It began with the simple act of helping his coworker, Maria, lift a heavy box of air conditioners without being asked. It was seeing the genuine, surprised gratitude in her eyes. It was realizing he had never done something for someone else without expecting something in return. Tonight, sitting in his small, sparsely furnished apartment, the kind of place he once would have sent a junior employee to inspect, he had written the email to his father. It wasn't the first he'd sent. The initial ones had been angry, pleading, demanding. They went unanswered. The later ones were desperate apologies, hollow and self-serving. This one was different. It was a confession. "Dad," it began, "I know you probably won't read this, but I have to write it anyway. For me. For a long time, I thought what happened on that plane was the worst day of my life because of what I lost. My job, my money, my friends. I was wrong. It was the worst day of my life because of what I was. I finally understand what you saw in me that day. Arrogance, cruelty, a deep, ugly ignorance that I mistook for confidence. I work in a stockroom now. My boss is a 24-year-old kid who's smarter and works harder than I ever did. The people I work with are from all over the world. They are kind and tired and funny, and they are better people than I ever was. They don't know who I used to be, and for that, I'm grateful. I think about Dr. Monroe every day. I used to think about her with resentment. Now I think about her with a shame so deep it feels like it's a part of my bones. I didn't just insult her. I tried to erase her. I tried to make her small because her presence made me feel small. It was the act of a coward. I'm not asking for anything. I know I have to earn my own way in the world, and I'm starting to understand what that means. I just wanted you to know that I finally see it. I see it all. I am sorry. Not just for embarrassing you, but for being the man who could do what I did. Marcus read the email twice on the cold observation deck. Each word was a paradox, a source of immense paternal pain and a flicker of desperate hope. He thought of Caleb as a boy, full of promise, before the world had wrapped him in the suffocating comfort of privilege. He had given his son everything, and in doing so, had robbed him of the chance to build anything for himself. His decision to cut him off had been the cruelest and kindest thing he had ever done. Amelia watched him, giving him his space. She knew, without being told, that this was the private grief of a father. Marcus finally looked up from the screen, his eyes glistening. He typed a slow, deliberate reply. It was not a pardon, but a map. Caleb, I have read your email. Acknowledgement is the first step on a very long road. Do not mistake the first step for the destination. Continue to build a life you can be proud of. Character is not forged in victory, but in how we recover from our deepest failures. The path back is through your own actions, not my forgiveness. Keep working. He hit send, the message flying out into the digital ether, a fragile thread of connection across an ocean. He put the phone away, the act feeling final. He turned to Amelia, his face a canvas of complex emotion. Consequences, he said, his voice thick. They are the universe's great equalizers. They apply to a boy in a stockroom and a CEO on a deck. Unavoidable. He gestured vaguely back towards the world beyond the lab's gates. Brenda, the flight attendant. I heard she works in the perfume department of a duty-free shop at Gatwick now. Spends her days watching the planes she can no longer board take off. And Tiffany, she tried to attach herself to a new money hedge fund manager, but her reputation preceded her. She exists now only on the periphery, a ghost in last season's couture. The fates of these others were not a source of satisfaction for him, only a sad confirmation of a predictable equation. Action, reaction. Cause, effect. He looked at Amelia, at her calm strength, at the brilliance that shone from her. He tried to cast you out into the darkness, Marcus said, his voice finding its strength again as he gestured to the star-filled sky. The ultimate act of foolishness. He had no idea you were already at home there, that you understood it, that you sought to chart it. He didn't realize, you don't just study the stars, Amelia. You are one. Amelia looked away from the telescope, her gaze sweeping across the Milky Way, a river of ancient light. She thought of Caleb in his stockroom, learning the hard-won alphabet of humility. She thought of Marcus, a king who had sacrificed his own prince to save his kingdom's soul. She thought of herself here on the cusp of discovery. Their lives were forever entangled, 3 celestial bodies knocked into new orbits by a single violent collision. There was no victory in Caleb's fall, only tragedy. Her own rise was not a product of his demise, but had happened in spite of it. The true victory, she realized, was not the punishment of the guilty, but the quiet, relentless continuation of the good. It was the intern, Priya, leaving the lab that evening with a newfound confidence. It was the stable energy reading on her tablet. It was the hope that one day, a boy in a stockroom might finally become a man. Up there in the silent, magnificent darkness, there was no first class, no economy. There was only the vast, beautiful, and unforgiving truth. And here, on the ground, she was finally free to help chart it. That is the incredible story of Dr. Amelia Monroe, a testament to the power of grace under pressure, and the simple, undeniable fact that a person's value is determined by their character and their contributions, not by the color of their skin or the assumptions of others. The hard karma that found Caleb, Tiffany, and Brenda wasn't magic. It was the natural, unavoidable consequence of their own actions, a powerful reminder that the world can be smaller than we think, and the people we disrespect today may hold the keys to our future tomorrow. What do you think? Was the karma deserved? Was Marcus Harrison's response too harsh, or was it exactly what was needed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and vindication moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another true story of life-changing drama. Thank you for watching.